The silence in the grand ballroom of Blackwood Manor was deafening. Just moments before, Lady Catherine and her daughter had laughed, pointing at the woman in the faded gray dress, calling her a beggar, a servant, a mistake. They thought her silence was weakness. They thought her poverty made her powerless. But the room stopped breathing when Duke Sebastian Thorne, the most feared man in England, walked past the heiresses and knelt before the girl with the rough hands. When he slid his heavy gold signet ring onto her finger, the game changed forever. This isn't a fairy tale. This is the brutal, satisfying story of Alara Vance's rise and the devastating karma that came for those who tormented her. Watch until the end. You won't believe the secret she was hiding. The year was 1884, and the rain in Yorkshire did not wash away the grime. It only made the cobblestones of Vance Hall slick and treacherous. For Alara Vance, the rain meant mud tracked into the foyer, which meant another hour on her knees, with a bristled brush and a bucket of freezing lye water. "You missed a spot, you wretched girl!" The voice was sharp, cutting through the damp air like a serrated knife. Alara didn't look up. She knew better. She simply scrubbed harder, her knuckles raw and red, the skin threatening to split. "I am sorry, Aunt Catherine," Alara whispered, her voice hoarse from disuse. Lady Catherine Vance stood above her, the hem of her silk skirt dangerously close to the bucket. She kicked the bucket slightly, sending a wave of dirty water sloshing over Alara's apron. It wasn't an accident. It never was. "That is, Lady Catherine, to you," the older woman sneered, adjusting the lace on her sleeve. "And do try to look presentable. We have guests arriving this evening, and I will not have my late brother's illegitimate mistake bringing shame upon this house." Alara bit the inside of her cheek until she tasted copper. Illegitimate. It was the lie Catherine had fed the county for 10 years. The truth was far more dangerous. Alara was the true heir to Vance Hall, the daughter of Catherine's older brother, Arthur Vance. But when Arthur and his wife died in a carriage accident when Alara was 8, Catherine had seized the papers, burned the will, and declared Alara a charity case, a bastard child taken in out of the kindness of her heart. Stripped of her name, her inheritance, and her dignity, Alara had been reduced to a scullery maid in her own home. "Isabella needs her hair curled," Catherine commanded, turning on her heel. "And don't you dare touch her with those filthy hands until you've washed them with vinegar." Alara stood up, her knees cracking. She picked up the heavy bucket, her back aching with a dull, constant throb. She was 20 years old, but she felt 50. Her beauty was hidden beneath layers of soot and oversized, ragged clothes, a deliberate tactic by Catherine to ensure Alara never outshone her cousin, Isabella. Upstairs, the bedroom that used to belong to Alara's mother was now a shrine to Isabella's vanity. Silk dresses were strewn across the floor, and the air smelled sickly sweet of rosewater and desperation. "You're late," Isabella snapped, looking at her reflection in the gilded mirror. She was a pretty girl, in the way a porcelain doll is pretty, cold, painted, and hollow. "The Duke of Blackwood is rumored to be attending the assembly next week. If I don't look perfect, it will be your head." "The Duke?" Lara asked, her voice quiet as she began to heat the curling irons in the fireplace. "I thought he never left London." "He's surveying his northern estates," Isabella said, her eyes gleaming with greed. "Duke Sebastian Thorne. They say he is richer than the Queen and twice as cruel. He needs a wife, Alara, a duchess, and Mother says it will be me." Alara focused on the iron. She had heard of Sebastian Thorne. The newspapers called him the Iron Duke. He was a war hero who had returned from the colonies with a scar down his cheek and a reputation for ruthlessness in business. He was a man who crushed his enemies without blinking. "He sounds formidable," Alara murmured. "He sounds like money," Isabella corrected, snatching a ribbon. "Now hurry up, and don't burn me like you did last time, or I'll have Mother lock you in the cellar again." The threat hung in the air, heavy and real. The cellar was dark, rat-infested, and freezing. Alara's hand didn't tremble, though her heart did. She had learned to turn her fear into a cold, hard stone in her chest. Later that evening, the guests arrived. It was the local magistrate, Mr. Henderson, and his wife. They were there to discuss the upcoming winter ball. Lara was permitted to serve tea, provided she kept her head down and didn't speak. As she poured the steaming Darjeeling into fine china cups her mother had bought in Paris, she listened to the gossip. "They say the Duke is looking for something specific," Mrs. Henderson whispered, leaning in conspiratorially. "Not just a pretty face. He's looking for the owner of the solstice locket." Ilara's hand jerked. A splash of hot tea landed on the saucer. "Clumsy oaf!" Catherine hissed, slapping Ilara's hand away. "Get out of my sight!" Ilara retreated to the shadows of the kitchen, her heart pounding against her ribs. She reached into the bodice of her dress, her fingers brushing against the cold metal hidden there. The solstice locket. It was a heavy silver oval, engraved with a sun and a moon. It was the only thing she had left of her father. He had given it to her the night before he died, telling her, "Keep this hidden, Ilara. It is a promise made in iron and blood. If you are ever in true danger, this will speak when you cannot." She had never understood what he meant. She had worn it tied with a piece of twine around her neck, hidden beneath her rags for 10 years. Why was the Duke of Blackwood looking for it? "Did you hear that?" came the cook's voice, Mrs. Higgins. She was a kind woman, the only ally Ilara had, though she had no power to stop Catherine. "The Duke," Ilara whispered. "Why does he want the locket?" Mrs. Higgins wiped her hands on her apron, her face pale. "I don't know, child. But Sebastian Thorne is a man who collects debts. If he's looking for that locket, it means someone owes him. Or he owes them." Ilara clutched the silver warmth against her skin. She wasn't powerless. She had a secret. And for the first time in 10 years, she wondered if that secret could be a weapon. 2 days later, the atmosphere in Vance Hall shifted from chaotic to hysterical. A courier had arrived at dawn, wearing the livery of the House of Blackwood, black velvet with silver trim. He didn't bring a letter. He brought a command. "His Grace, Duke Sebastian Thorne, requests the hospitality of Vance Hall for midday tea while his carriage undergoes repairs." The courier announced. Lady Catherine nearly fainted. This was it. This was the chance to parade Isabella in front of the most eligible bachelor in England, right in their own drawing room. "Everything must be spotless," Catherine shrieked, tearing through the hallway. "Ilara, scrub the front steps again, polish the silver. And then, for the love of God, hide yourself. If the Duke sees a creature like you in my house, he will think we are running a poorhouse." Ilara worked until her fingers bled. She polished the mahogany banisters until they gleamed like glass. She arranged the flowers Isabella had clumsily cut. She set the table with the best silver. By noon, the house looked deceptively grand. Lady Catherine was dressed in stiff purple velvet, and Isabella wore a gown of cream silk that cost more than the servants, wages combined for a year. Ilara was banished to the scullery, ordered to wash the pots and stay out of sight. But fate, it seemed, had a different plan. At 12:15, the sound of heavy hooves on gravel announced his arrival. From the small, grime-encrusted window of the scullery, Ilara watched. The carriage was black lacquer, drawn by 4 massive black stallions. The door opened, and a man stepped out. He was taller than any man Ilara had ever seen. He wore a long, dark coat, tailored to perfection. He didn't wear a hat. His hair was dark, swept back from a face that looked like it had been carved from granite. And there, just as the rumors said, was a thin, pale scar running from his temple down to his jawline. It didn't make him ugly, it made him dangerous. He moved with a predatory grace, walking up the steps. Lady Catherine and Isabella were bowing so low they looked ridiculous. Ilara turned away, focusing on the sink. He is just a man, she told herself. Just another tyrant with a title. But 20 minutes later, catastrophe struck. Mrs. Higgins, flustered by the pressure, knocked over the tray of pastries meant for the Duke. They scattered across the dirty kitchen floor, ruined. "Oh, heavens!" Mrs. Higgins cried. "The tea! It's ready to go up, but I have no cakes." "I'll plate the biscuits from the morning tin," Elara said quickly, trying to calm the older woman. "They are fresh enough." "I can't take the tray up," Mrs. Higgins gasped, clutching her chest. "My palpitations are starting. The stress. Elara, you must do it." "I can't," Elara said, her eyes widening. "Catherine will kill me." "If the Duke waits, Catherine will kill us both," Mrs. Higgins countered. "Just go. Keep your head down. Place the tray and leave. He won't even notice you." Elara took a deep breath. She smoothed her tattered gray dress. She had tried to clean it, but the stains of ash and labor were permanent. She tied her hair back severely, washed her hands, and picked up the heavy silver tray. "Invisible," she told herself. "Be invisible." She walked through the service door into the drawing room. The room was warm. Duke Sebastian Thorne was sitting in her father's favorite armchair, looking bored. Isabella was playing the piano, badly, while Catherine chattered incessantly about their lineage. Elara moved silently. She approached the low table. "And of course, we are known for our charity," Catherine was saying, her voice sickeningly sweet. "We do so much for the poor." Elara set the tray down. The china rattled slightly. At that moment, Isabella, annoyed that the Duke wasn't watching her play, stopped abruptly and turned. Seeing Elara, a flash of malice crossed her face. She stood up and walked toward the tea table. "Oh, clumsy girl," Isabella said loud enough for the Duke to hear. As Elara turned to leave, Isabella stuck out her foot. It was subtle, but effective. Elara tripped. She didn't fall completely, catching herself on the edge of the table, but the movement was violent enough that the heavy silver teapot wobbled and tipped. Scalding water splashed over the side, not onto the Duke, but onto Elara's hand. Elara gasped, a sharp intake of breath, but she didn't scream. She had learned long ago that screaming only brought more punishment. She clutched her burned hand to her chest, her eyes watering. "You incompetent fool!" Catherine roared, leaping to her feet. "You've ruined the tea service! Get out! Get out before I have you whipped!" Elara bowed her head, shame burning hotter than the water on her skin. "I am sorry, my lord. I am sorry, my lady." She turned to flee, to run back to the safety of the dark scullery. "Wait." The word was spoken softly, but it carried the weight of a gavel strike. The room froze. Catherine's mouth snapped shut. Isabella paled. Duke Sebastian Thorne stood up. He wasn't looking at Catherine. He wasn't looking at Isabella. His eyes, dark, intelligent, and piercing, were fixed on Elara. He walked around the table, ignoring the puddle of tea. He stopped inches from Elara. He smelled of leather, expensive tobacco, and rain. "Show me your hand," he commanded. "It is nothing, Your Grace," Elara whispered, terrified. "I am just a servant. "Show me," he repeated. It wasn't a request. Trembling, Elara held out her hand. The skin was already turning an angry red. The Duke looked at the burn, his expression unreadable. Then, his gaze traveled up her arm, past the frayed sleeve of her gray dress, to her neck. Because of the fall, the twine holding her locket had shifted. The silver oval had slipped out from her bodice and was now resting against the rough fabric of her dress, gleaming in the afternoon light. The sun and the moon. Sebastian's eyes narrowed. He reached out, his gloved fingers brushing against her collarbone as he lifted the locket. Catherine gasped. "Your Grace, please, do not touch the filth. She stole that. I am sure she stole it." "Stole it?" Sebastian asked, his voice dangerously low. He didn't look away from Elara. "Tell me, girl, what is your name?" Elara looked up, meeting his gaze. For the first time in her life, she didn't feel like prey. She felt like she was being really, truly seen. "Elara," she said, her voice shaking but clear. "Elara Vance." The Duke went still. His thumb brushed over the engraving on the locket. "Vance," he repeated. He turned his head slowly to look at Lady Catherine, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "You told me Arthur Vance's daughter died 10 years ago." Catherine stammered, sweat beading on her forehead. She is a distant cousin, a bastard. She is insane, Your Grace. She thinks she is." "This locket," Sebastian interrupted, his voice like grinding stones, "contains a portrait of my mother. I gave it to Arthur Vance on the battlefield in Zululand when he saved my life. I told him that if he ever had a daughter, this locket would ensure her protection." He looked back at Elara. The cruelty in his face vanished, replaced by an intensity that made her knees weak. "I have been looking for you, Elara Vance," he said. Then he did the unthinkable. He took a linen handkerchief from his pocket, dipped it in the pitcher of cool water on the tray, and gently, so gently, laid it over her burned hand. "Catherine," the Duke said, his back to the terrified aunt, "prepare the guest suite, the finest one." For you, Your Grace?" Catherine squeaked. "No," Sebastian said, turning to face them, his eyes blazing with a cold fury. "For Elara, she is no longer your servant. As of this moment, she is under the protection of the House of Blackwood, and God help anyone who disrespects her again." Elara stood frozen, the cool cloth on her hand, the Duke's towering figure shielding her from her tormentors. The balance of power had just shifted, and the floorboards of Vance Hall trembled with the weight of it. But Catherine Vance was not a woman who gave up power easily. As Elara was led out of the room by the Duke himself, Catherine's eyes narrowed. She knew secrets about the Duke, too, secrets that could destroy him. And she would burn the house down before she let the servant girl become the mistress. For the first time in 10 years, Elara woke up not to the sound of a screaming aunt, but to silence. She lay still, afraid to open her eyes, convinced that the soft mattress beneath her was a cruel dream, and that she would soon wake up on the straw pallet in the scullery. But the air didn't smell of mildew and onions. It smelled of lavender and beeswax. "Miss Elara." The voice was gentle. Elara opened her eyes to see Mrs. Higgins standing by the bed, holding a tray. But Mrs. Higgins wasn't wearing her greasy apron. She was wearing a crisp, clean uniform. Her eyes were red-rimmed, but she was smiling. "Mrs. Higgins?" Elara sat up, wincing as the movement pulled at the bandage on her burned hand. "The Duke ordered it," the cook said, setting the tray down. It held fresh fruit, warm bread, and a pot of chocolate, luxuries Elara hadn't tasted since she was a child. "He told Lady Catherine that if I was the only one who showed you kindness, I was the only one fit to serve you. I've been promoted to your personal maid, miss." Elara felt tears prick her eyes. "Where is he?" "In the study with his solicitors. He sent for them from the village immediately. He's tearing through your father's old papers like a storm." Mrs. Higgins lowered her voice. "But you must be careful, child. The house is quiet, but it's the quiet of a viper before it strikes. Lady Catherine and Miss Isabella are locked in the west wing. I heard them arguing earlier." Elara looked at her bandaged hand. Sebastian Thorne had saved her, yes, but he had also painted a target on her back. An hour later, Elara stood before a tall mirror. Mrs. Higgins had helped her bathe, scrubbing away the soot and grime to reveal skin that was pale and porcelain, smooth, despite the scars of labor on her hands. They had found an old trunk in the attic, one Catherine had forgotten, containing her mother's dresses. Elara put on a gown of deep midnight blue velvet. It was slightly out of fashion, high-collared and long-sleeved, but it fit her slender frame perfectly. When she looked in the mirror, the scullery maid was gone. In her place stood the true mistress of Vance Hall. She descended the grand staircase, her heart hammering. As she reached the bottom step, the library door opened, and Duke Sebastian Thorne stepped out. He stopped, For a long moment he said nothing. His gaze swept over her, taking in the blue velvet, her dark hair now pinned up in soft curls, and the dignity she wore like armor. "You look like Arthur," he said quietly, his voice rough. Elara curtsied, a movement that came back to her from a childhood of lessons. "Your Grace, I do not know how to thank you." Sebastian walked toward her. He looked tired. He hadn't slept. "Do not thank me, Elara. Apologize to me for taking 10 years to find you. I promised your father I would protect his bloodline, and I failed until yesterday." He offered her his arm. "Come, we lunch, and you will sit at the head of the table, where you belong." The dining room was a battlefield disguised as a meal. Lady Catherine and Isabella were already seated. When Elara entered on the arm of the Duke, Isabella gripped her fork so hard her knuckles turned white. Catherine, however, was smiling. It was a tight, brittle smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Cousin," Catherine said smoothly, as if she hadn't treated Elara like a slave for a decade, "you clean up adequately, though one wonders if a maid can truly appreciate fine dining." "Careful, Catherine," Sebastian warned, pulling out a chair for Elara. "One wonders if a widow living on stolen funds can appreciate the concept of prison." Catherine paled, but didn't back down. "Stolen? Harsh words, Your Grace. I merely managed the estate when my brother died. Elara was unwell, disturbed. We kept her in the scullery for her own safety. She has delusions, you know." Elara's hands trembled in her lap. This was their new angle. Insanity. "I am not mad," Elara said, her voice steady despite her fear. "Aren't you, dear?" Catherine took a sip of wine. "You claim to hear voices. You claim this house speaks to you. We only wanted to help." Sebastian slammed his hand onto the table. The silverware jumped. "Enough. I have sent a rider to London to retrieve the original copy of Arthur's will from the Chancery Archives. Once I have it, your management of this estate ends. You have 3 days, Catherine. Pack your bags." Isabella let out a sob. "Mother, you can't let him do this. The winter ball is in 2 days. I need to be presented." "There will be no ball for you," Sebastian said cold. "Elara will be the hostess of the winter ball." The silence that followed was absolute. To host the winter ball was to be declared the premier lady of the county. It was the position Catherine had coveted for years. "You can't be serious," Isabella screeched. "Her? Look at her hands. She's a peasant." "She is a Vance," Sebastian said. "And she is under my protection." But as lunch continued, Elara noticed something terrifying. Catherine wasn't looking at Sebastian. She was looking at the grandfather clock in the corner, counting the minutes. She was waiting for something. Or someone. The blow came that evening. A telegram arrived for the Duke. Elara was in the library, reading a book she had longed to touch for years, when Sebastian stormed in, his face like a thundercloud. "I have to leave," he said, the words sharp. Elara's heart dropped. "Leave? Now?" "My business interests in Liverpool. Several ships have been detained. If I do not go personally, I stand to lose a fortune that funds half the orphanages in London. It is a coordinated attack on my finances." He paced the room, looking like a caged tiger. "The timing is too convenient. Catherine has allies. She knows if I am here, she is powerless. So she has found a way to draw me out." "If you leave," Elara whispered, standing up, "she will destroy me." Sebastian stopped pacing. He crossed the room in 2 strides and took her uninjured hand in his. His grip was warm and firm. "I will be gone for 24 hours. 2 days at the most. I have left 4 of my personal guards at the doors. They answer only to me. Catherine cannot harm you physically. She doesn't need to harm me physically. Elara said, her voice trembling. "She is poisoning the air. She plans to prove I am mad." "Let them try." Sebastian began to pull the heavy gold ring from his right pinky finger. It was a massive piece of jewelry, heavy gold set with a black onyx stone engraved with the crest of the House of Blackwood, a roaring wolf. "Elara, give me your hand." She held out her hand. He slid the heavy ring onto her thumb. It was too large for her fingers. It felt warm from his skin. "This is my signet," Sebastian said, his eyes locking onto hers. "In the eyes of the law, and in the eyes of society, he who holds this ring speaks with the voice of the Duke of Blackwood. It gives you access to my accounts, my men, and my authority." He squeezed her hand, closing her fingers over the cold gold. "If Catherine tries to order you, show her this. If the servants hesitate, show them this. If anyone dares to touch you, Elara, you tell them that the Iron Duke will burn the world down to avenge you. Do you understand?" "I understand," she breathed. "I will return before the first guest arrives for the winter ball," he promised. He raised her hand to his lips, kissing the knuckles just above the ring. "Be brave, little wolf." 10 minutes later, the black carriage thundered down the driveway, disappearing into the mist. Elara stood at the window, clutching the ring. She felt a surge of strength. She was not alone. She had his token. But she had underestimated Lady Catherine. As soon as the carriage was out of sight, Catherine emerged from the shadows of the hallway. She walked to the front door, where the Duke's guards were stationed. "Gentlemen," Catherine said, holding out a tray of steaming mugs, "it is a bitter night. Cook has prepared some hot cider for you." The guards, stoic but human, accepted the drinks. "Thank you, my lady." Upstairs, Elara heard the heavy front door bolt shut. A strange feeling of dread settled in her stomach. She looked at the ring on her thumb. An hour later, a carriage arrived. It wasn't the Duke returning. It was a closed, windowless carriage, painted a dull, peeling gray. Elara heard voices in the foyer. Harsh, male voices. She walked to the landing, the ring heavy on her hand. Downstairs, the 4 guards were slumped in their chairs, unconscious. The cider had been drugged. Stepping over the sleeping guards was a short, stout man with a monocle and a doctor's bag. Behind him stood 2 burly orderlies carrying a straitjacket. "Where's the patient?" the doctor asked, checking his pocket watch. Catherine stepped into the light, a triumphant smile twisting her face. She pointed up the stairs, directly at Elara. "There she is, Dr. Fennel, my poor niece. She has been raving all day. She thinks she is a duchess. She thinks she owns this house. It is quite tragic." Elara gripped the banister. "What is the meaning of this? Dr. Fennel is the head of the St. Jude's Asylum for the Incurably Insane," Catherine called up, her voice dripping with mock sympathy. "Since the Duke has abandoned you, my dear, I am exercising my rights as your legal guardian. We are sending you somewhere safe, somewhere you can't hurt anyone." "I am under the protection of the Duke of Blackwood," Elara shouted, holding up her hand. "I hold his signet ring." Dr. Fennel squinted up at her. "Ah, yes, theft. A common symptom of hysteria. She steals trinkets and believes they give her power." He nodded to the orderlies. "Secure her, and be careful. She bites." The 2 men started up the stairs, their heavy boots thudding on the wood. "Stay back!" Elara cried, backing away. "If you touch me, the Duke will hang you." "The Duke is in Liverpool, you foolish girl," Isabella laughed, appearing beside her mother. "And by the time he gets back, you will be in a padded cell, heavily sedated, unable to speak a coherent word. He will think you ran away, or that you finally snapped." Elara turned and ran. She bolted down the hallway toward the master bedroom, her heart slamming against her ribs. She heard the men running behind her. She burst into the room and slammed the door, locking it. But the wood was old, and the men were strong. Thud. The door shuddered. Thud. A crack appeared in the panel. Elara looked around wildly. The window? It was too high. The fireplace? Too small. She looked at the ring. "Use it," Sebastian had said. "It gives you my authority." But authority meant nothing to men paid to ignore it. She needed a weapon. She ran to the fireplace and grabbed the heavy iron poker. The door splintered open. The two orderlies burst in, grinning. Now, missy," one of them sneered. "Don't make this hard." Ilara raised the poker, her eyes blazing with a fire that had been suppressed for 10 years. She wasn't fighting for a clean floor or a scrap of bread anymore. She was fighting for her life. "My name is Ilara Vance," she said, her voice low and dangerous. "And the first man who steps forward will not leave this room walking." Downstairs, Catherine poured herself a glass of sherry. "Finally," she whispered to Isabella, "the pest is being exterminated." But Catherine had forgotten one thing. The Duke's guards were drugged, yes. But Sebastian Thorne was a man of war. He never left his most valuable treasure unguarded by just men. As the orderlies lunged at Ilara, a low, guttural growl echoed from the balcony door. The glass shattered inward. Ilara gasped. The men froze. Standing amidst the broken glass, wet from the rain, was not a man. It was a dog. No, a beast. A massive Irish wolfhound, gray as storm clouds, with eyes that burned like yellow coals. Sebastian's personal hunting hound, Titan. He had left the dog on the balcony, a silent, deadly sentry that Catherine knew nothing about. Titan bared his teeth, looking from Ilara to the men. He saw the poker in her hand. He saw the threat, and then he launched himself into the air. The room exploded into chaos. Titan, 150 pounds of muscle and fury, hit the first orderly in the chest. The man went down with a sickening crunch, screaming as the dog's jaws clamped onto his forearm. The second orderly, terrified, scrambled back, tripping over his own feet. "Titan, protect!" Ilara screamed, pointing at the door. The massive dog released the wailing man and turned on the second, barking with a ferocity that shook the window panes. The orderly scrambled out of the room, dragging his injured companion with him, slamming the door shut from the outside. Ilara heard the key turn in the lock. "Open this door!" Dr. Fennell's voice came from the hallway, trembling but furious. "Or I will pump gas through the keyhole." Ilara looked at Titan. The dog was pacing in front of the door, growling low in his throat, blood on his muzzle. He had bought her time, but he couldn't get them out. They were trapped on the second floor. She ran to the window. The storm outside was raging. The rain lashed against the glass, turning the gardens below into a mud bath. It was a 20-foot drop to the stone patio. "We have to go," she whispered to the dog. She stripped the sheets from the bed, tying them together with knots she had learned from the stable boys years ago. She tied one end to the heavy leg of the four-poster bed and threw the other out into the night. "Titan," she commanded, pointing to the bed. "Stay, guard." The dog whined but obeyed, sitting on the rug, his eyes fixed on the door. He would hold them off when they finally broke through. Ilara climbed onto the sill. The wind whipped her hair across her face. She grabbed the wet linen rope and lowered herself. The fabric was slippery, burning her palms. Halfway down, the sheet tore. Ilara fell the last 10 feet, crashing into the rose bushes below. Thorns tore at her velvet dress and scratched her face, but the mud softened the impact. She gasped. The wind knocked out of her but scrambled to her feet. She looked up. Shadows were moving in her bedroom window. They were breaking the door down. She had to run. She didn't run toward the village. They would expect that. She didn't run to the stables. Catherine would have guards there. Instead, Ilara ran toward the old crypts at the edge of the estate, near the cliffs. It was a place everyone feared, a place Catherine never went. Her boots sank into the mud. Her lungs burned. She clutched the signet ring on her thumb, the metal cold against her skin. "Survive," she told herself. "Sebastian is coming back." She reached the edge of the woods, the trees thrashing in the wind. But as she stepped into the cover of the oaks, a blinding light hit her face. Lanterns. There she is! It wasn't the orderlies. It was the gamekeeper, a man named Crouch who had been on Catherine's payroll for years. He stepped out from behind a tree, holding a shotgun. 2 other men flanked him. "Going for a walk, Miss Ilara?" Crouch sneered, spitting tobacco into the mud. "Lady Catherine said you might try to run, said you were in a fugue state." Ilara backed away, raising her hand. "I hold the Duke's signet. Let me pass and he will reward you. Touch me and he will hang you." Crouch laughed, a dark, wet sound. "The Duke ain't here, darling. And by the time he gets back, you'll be a drooling vegetable in St. Jude's. Lady Catherine, promise me £50 to bring you in." He lunged. Ilara swung a heavy branch she had picked up, striking him across the face. Crouch yelled, staggering back. She turned to run, but the wet leaves betrayed her. She slipped, her foot catching in a root, and went down hard. Before she could rise, the other 2 men were on her. They were rough, dragging her up by her hair. "Get off me!" she screamed, fighting with everything she had. She bit one man's hand, drawing blood. "Sedate her!" Crouch roared, wiping blood from his nose. Dr. Fennel emerged from the darkness, his black bag in hand. He looked like a vulture in the rain. He pulled out a syringe filled with a cloudy yellow liquid. "Hold her arm steady," Fennel ordered. "No!" Ilara thrashed, kicking out. "Sebastian! Sebastian!" The needle pierced her skin. Cold fire spread through her veins. The world began to tilt. The roar of the ocean faded into a buzz. The faces of the men blurred into grotesque masks. "Such a pity," she heard Fennel say from a great distance. "Young women are so fragile these days." The last thing Ilara felt was the heavy gold ring being wrenched off her finger by Crouch. "Shiny little thing," Crouch grunted. "Might fetch a pretty penny." "Give that to Catherine," Fennel snapped. "We need to make it look like she left it behind." Then, darkness took her. The carriage ride back from Liverpool was grueling, but Sebastian Thorne did not stop for rest. A gnawing unease sat in his gut, a primal instinct that had kept him alive in the jungles of Zululand. He had arrived in Liverpool only to find the crisis with his ships was a fabrication. A paperwork error, the port authority claimed. A misunderstanding. A distraction, Sebastian realized. He had turned the carriage around immediately, driving the horses to the brink of exhaustion. It was dawn when the Blackwood carriage tore through the iron gates of Vance Hall. The storm had passed, leaving the estate shrouded in a thick, eerie mist. Sebastian didn't wait for the footman to open the door. He kicked it open and leaped out onto the gravel. The house was too quiet. "Titan!" he whistled, a sharp, piercing sound. Usually the hound would be bounding down the steps to greet him. Today, there was only silence. Sebastian walked up the steps, his hand resting on the hilt of the cane sword he carried. He pushed the front door open. The foyer was empty. The guards he had left were nowhere to be seen. "Catherine!" His voice boomed through the hall, shaking the crystal chandelier. Lady Catherine appeared at the top of the stairs. She was wearing a black mourning dress, holding a lace handkerchief to her eyes. Isabella stood behind her, looking pale and nervous. "Oh, Your Grace," Catherine sobbed, descending the stairs theatrically. "Thank God you have returned. It has been a nightmare." Sebastian didn't move. He stood like a statue of judgment. "Where is she?" Catherine stopped at the bottom step, weeping. She is gone, Your Grace." "Gone?" Sebastian's voice dropped to a whisper that was more terrifying than a shout. "Define gone." "She ran away." Catherine sniffed. "Last night, during the storm. She had a fit. She was raving about how she wasn't good enough for you, how the pressure was too much. We tried to stop her, but she was violent. She attacked the staff." "She attacked the staff," Sebastian repeated flatly. "Yes. And then she ran out into the storm. We searched for hours, Your Grace. Crouch, the gamekeeper, found this." on the edge of the cliffs. Catherine reached into her pocket and pulled out the signet ring. Sebastian stared at the ring. Then he looked at Catherine. He walked forward slowly and took the ring. He inspected it. It was muddy. "She left this?" "She left a note, too." Isabella piped up, her voice trembling. She held out a crumpled piece of paper. "It was on her pillow." Sebastian took the paper. The handwriting was shaky, frantic. "I cannot be a duchess. I am just a maid. I belong to the dirt. Do not look for me. Ilara." Sebastian read it twice. Then he looked up, his eyes scanning the room. He saw a scratch on the mahogany banister. He saw a faint, scrubbed stain on the rug that looked like mud or blood. "Where are my guards?" Sebastian asked. They went to the village to search for her." Catherine lied smoothly. "They were so distraught that they let her slip past them." "And my dog?" Catherine hesitated. "The beast ran off after her. We haven't seen it." Sebastian closed his hand over the ring. The gold bit into his palm. "You are lying," he said. Catherine gasped. "Your Grace, how dare you? I am a lady of—" "You are a liar and a snake," Sebastian said, his voice rising. "Ilara would never leave this ring. She knows what it means. And this note, Ilara's handwriting is elegant, taught by her father. This scrawl looks like it was written by a frightened child, or forged by an idiot." He threw the note into the fireplace. "I am going to tear this house apart," Sebastian declared. "And if I find one hair on her head that has been harmed, bark." A weak, muffled sound came from the garden. Sebastian spun around. He ran through the house, kicking open the French doors to the patio. There, dragging himself through the rose bushes, was Titan. The dog was bleeding from a cut on his flank, his leg favoring one side, but he was alive. "Titan!" Sebastian fell to his knees, checking the dog. Titan whined and licked Sebastian's hand. Then, the dog turned his head toward the woods and barked, a sharp, urgent sound. He tried to stand, stumbling toward the tree line. "He knows," Sebastian whispered. He stood up, his eyes cold steel. He turned back to the house, where Catherine and Isabella were watching from the window, their faces white as sheets. Sebastian strode back into the drawing room. He didn't yell. He didn't rage. He simply walked up to the heavy oak table, picked up a porcelain vase, worth a small fortune, and smashed it onto the floor. The crash made Isabella scream. "My dog tracked her to the woods," Sebastian said. "My guards are missing. My fiancé is missing. And you are wearing black." He stepped closer to Catherine, towering over her. "I will ask you one time, Catherine, only once. If you lie to me, I will have the magistrate arrest you for kidnapping, and I will personally see that you rot in Newgate prison." Catherine trembled, her lip quivering. She looked at Isabella. Isabella looked at the floor. She was ill," Catherine shrieked. "We sent her to a hospital, for her own good." "She was mad." "Which hospital?" Sebastian demanded. "St. Jude's," Isabella whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Mother sent her to St. Jude's Asylum." The color drained from Sebastian's face. St. Jude's was not a hospital. It was a graveyard for the living. It was a place where people were sent to be forgotten, where the treatments were torture, and the survival rate was 0. "You sent her to the butcher," Sebastian said, his voice shaking with fury. He turned to the door. "Isabella," he said without looking back, "pray that I get there in time, because if she is hurt, your mother goes to prison. But you will be on the streets." He ran to the stables. His carriage horses were spent. He needed speed. He grabbed the nearest saddle and threw it onto his warhorse, Odin, a massive black stallion that had carried him through gunfire. He mounted the horse, Titan limping but determined at his heels. To St. Jude's, Sebastian commanded. He had to ride 10 miles. He had to cross the river. And he had to do it before Dr. Fennel broke Ilara's mind. The smell of St. Jude's Asylum was the first thing to assault Ilara's senses. It smelled of boiled cabbage, harsh carbolic acid, and stale fear. She gasped, her eyes flying open. She was no longer in her velvet dress. She was wearing a rough, white linen shift, damp and freezing. Her wrists were strapped to a metal chair in a room tiled entirely in white stone. "Ah, the patient returns to us." Dr. Fennel's voice echoed off the tiles. Alara struggled, but the leather straps were tight. She was in the hydrotherapy room. A hose was coiled on the floor like a snake. "Please," Alara croaked, her throat dry. "You are making a mistake. I am the Duchess of Blackwood." Dr. Fennel chuckled, adjusting his spectacles. "Yes, yes, and I am the King of Prussia. Delusions of grandeur are quite common, my dear. We find that freezing water is excellent for cooling the overheated female brain." He picked up the hose. He signaled to an orderly who turned a rusty valve on the wall. Ice-cold water blasted out. "Let us wash away the madness." Fennel smiled cruelly. He raised the hose. Boom! The heavy iron doors at the end of the corridor didn't just open. They shuddered, as if hit by a cannonball. Fennel froze. The water hissed onto the floor. "What is that?" Boom! The sound came again, accompanied by the distinct crack of wood splintering. Shouts erupted from the hallway outside, screams of orderlies, the sound of heavy boots, and the terrifying deep bark of a hound. "Lock the door!" Fennel screamed at the orderly. The orderly ran to the door, but before he could touch the bolt, the door exploded inward. It wasn't a cannon. It was a man. Duke Sebastian Thorne stood in the doorway, framed by the gloom of the asylum corridor. He was soaked to the bone, mud splattered across his face, his chest heaving. In his hand, he held a heavy cavalry saber that gleamed under the gaslights. Beside him, limping but snarling, was Titan. Sebastian looked like a demon rising from hell. His eyes scanned the room until they landed on Alara, strapped to the chair, shivering. The look on his face shifted from rage to a devastation so profound it sucked the air out of the room. "Get away from her," Sebastian said. The volume was low, but the vibration of it was enough to rattle the instruments on the tray. "Now see here," Fennel stammered, holding up the hose like a pathetic shield. "This is a private medical facility. You are trespassing. I have paperwork signed by her guardian." Sebastian stepped into the room. The orderly tried to lunge at him. Sebastian didn't even look. He simply swung the pommel of his sword backward, catching the man in the temple. The orderly dropped like a sack of flour. Fennel backed up against the tiled wall, trembling. I was only following orders," Lady Catherine said. Sebastian ignored him. He dropped his sword. It clattered loudly on the tiles and fell to his knees beside Alara. His hands, usually so steady, shook as he fumbled with the leather buckles. "I'm here," he whispered, his voice cracking. "I'm here, Alara. I've got you." As the straps fell away, Alara collapsed forward. Sebastian caught her, pulling her against his wet coat, burying his face in her hair. "Forgive me. God, forgive me for leaving you." "You came," she wept, clutching his lapels. "You came back." Sebastian stood up, lifting her effortlessly into his arms. He turned to Dr. Fennel. Titan moved forward, growling, blocking Fennel's path to the door. "Please, Your Grace," Fennel whimpered, sliding down the wall. "I am a man of science. I didn't know." Sebastian looked at the doctor with eyes devoid of mercy. "You are not a man of science. You are a man of profit." "I will sue," Fennel shrieked hysterically. "You cannot just walk in here. The law." "I own the law," Sebastian said coldly. "And as of 10 minutes ago, I own the mortgage on this building. My solicitors bought the debt this morning." Fennel's jaw dropped. "Get out," Sebastian commanded. "Before I let the dog decide your severance package." Fennel scrambled on his hands and knees out of the room, running into the waiting arms of the local constabulary, whom Sebastian had summoned on his ride over. The sun was setting by the time the carriage returned to Vance Hall. This time, it wasn't just the Duke's carriage. A procession of police wagons followed. Lady Catherine and Isabella were sitting in the drawing room, drinking the Duke's best brandy, celebrating their victory. "To the future," Catherine toasted, clinking her glass against Isabella's. "And to the silence of the past." The front doors were thrown open. Catherine stood up, a smile ready on her lips, expecting Dr. Fennel with news of Ilara's, quote, permanent condition. Instead, she saw Ilara Vance. Ilara walked in on her own 2 feet. She was wearing one of Sebastian's heavy coats over her shift, but her head was held high. Behind her stood the Duke, and behind him the chief magistrate of the county. "Ilara?" Catherine dropped her glass. It shattered on the floor, brandy staining the rug like blood. "But you are insane. You are in an asylum." "I am quite sane, Aunt Catherine," Ilara said, her voice steady. "But you seem to be having trouble with reality." The magistrate stepped forward, holding a sheaf of yellowed papers. "Lady Catherine Vance, I have a warrant for your arrest." "Arrest?" Catherine screeched. "On what grounds?" "Fraud, embezzlement, attempted murder, and the kidnapping of a peer of the realm," the magistrate read. "The Duke's solicitors recovered the original will of Arthur Vance from the Chancery Archives this afternoon. It explicitly states that upon his death, the estate passes to his daughter, Ilara. It also reveals that you have spent the last 10 years forging signatures to siphon funds into your own accounts." Isabella screamed. "No, we are nobility. You can't touch us." "You are penniless," Sebastian corrected, stepping forward. He placed a hand on Ilara's shoulder. "And you are trespassing in the Duchess's home." "Duchess," Isabella whispered. Sebastian turned to Ilara. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the signet ring, now cleaned and polished. He took her hand and slid it back onto her thumb. "Will you marry me, Ilara Vance?" he asked, in front of everyone, "not to save you, but because you are the only woman brave enough to fight for herself." Ilara looked at the man who had burned down the world for her. "Yes," she whispered. As the constables handcuffed Catherine, she began to laugh. It was a manic, broken sound. "You can't send me to prison," she cackled. "I am a fragile old woman. I am unwell. I demand to be sent to a hospital." Ilara stepped forward. She looked down at the woman who had tormented her for a decade. She didn't feel anger anymore. She felt pity. "You are right, Aunt," Ilara said softly. "Prison is too harsh for a woman of your delicate mental state. You need professional help." Ilara pulled a paper from her pocket. It was a transfer order. "I have arranged for your care," Ilara said. "Since the Duke now owns St. Jude's Asylum, we have a vacancy in the hydrotherapy ward. Dr. Fennel has been arrested, but the new staff is very thorough." Catherine's face went white. She knew exactly what happened in that ward. "No!" Catherine screamed as the constables dragged her away. "No, not St. Jude's. Anything but St. Jude's." Her screams echoed down the hallway, fading into the night, exactly as Ilara's silence had for 10 years. 6 months later, the wedding of the Duke and Duchess of Blackwood was the event of the century. Ilara wore white silk, not gray rags. Her hands, once rough and burned, were healed, though faint scars remained, a reminder of her strength. During the reception, she stood on the balcony, looking out over the gardens. Titan sat at her feet, healthy and loyal. Sebastian wrapped his arms around her from behind. "What are you thinking about?" Ilara touched the solstice locket around her neck, now resting next to a diamond necklace. "I was thinking," she smiled, leaning back against him, "that they thought I was powerless. They thought I was nothing but a cinder." "And they forgot," Sebastian whispered, kissing her cheek. "That fire starts with a single spark." And that is the incredible story of Ilara Vance and the Iron Duke. It serves as a brutal reminder that true power isn't about titles or money. It's about the resilience of the human spirit. Lady Catherine thought she could bury Ilara in the dark, but she didn't realize that Ilara was a seed, waiting to grow. The karma served at the end. Catherine being sent to the very asylum she tried to weaponize is the kind of poetic justice we rarely see in real life, but always hope for. If this story moved you, or if you cheered when Sebastian broke down those doors, please hit the like button. It helps us share these powerful stories with more people. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a tale of romance, revenge, and redemption. What would you have done in Ilara's place? Let me know in the comments below.